We're currently living in troubled times, and many of us respond to these troubled times with a feeling of injured self-pity, as though something that was supposed to have gone right has gone wrong. I would like to reverse the equation. Nothing was entirely supposed to go right, and so nothing has particularly gone wrong. We've simply returned to a state of crisis, which is the norm in human history. It's sometimes the principle of newspapers that murder, disease, crisis is the exception. It makes the news. But in fact, this is the news. This is all that ever happens. So, as I say, this feeling of being in a historically abnormal position is really a misreading of the true facts of existence, which is an almost continuous series of crises. Nowadays, our philosophers and thinkers and public figures are often in the business of trying to tell us how to cope with, how to make life better. Somehow the improvement of life is the way in which most problems are viewed. How can we make things go better? I want to direct your thoughts to a school of philosophy that flourished in ancient Rome and that took a completely different approach. I'm talking about Stoicism and the Stoic school of philosophy. When we speak of someone being stoic in the face of a disaster, we are very much plugged in to an ancestral memory of how the Stoics of ancient Rome went about things. One of my favourite Stoic philosophers is the philosopher Seneca, who lived in the time of Nero, a very troubled time for the Roman Empire. If we think we haven't got it bad, look at Nero's reign for what was going on then. And he very much believed that philosophy was a discipline to keep you sane in troubled times, and that one of the best ways to be sane was precisely to master pessimism, to make yourself at home in pessimism, to become a master of this strange and perhaps depressing seeming, but not actually depressing philosophy. Seneca wrote a book on anger. Very interesting thing about anger. Now, many of us nowadays think that anger is an almost physiological problem. It's to do with sort of being hot-blooded or something. Seneca thought that was nonsense. He believed that anger, we get angry for a very simple reason: optimism. Optimism makes us angry. And he compared a very interesting thing. He asked why people don't get angry when it rains. Particularly in Northern Europe. The reason why people don't get angry when it rains is that we expect it to rain. Particularly in England, it's amazing if it doesn't rain. So it would not occur to anybody to get angry at the fact it is raining. Now, the interesting thing is we don't adopt this very wise approach in all areas of life. Think about our keys. We start shouting when we lose the house keys, or how we behave when we're stuck in traffic. We insult people. We think, how come we're in traffic? Now, essentially, that is because we believe implicitly in a world in which keys never go astray and the roads are always mysteriously traffic-free. A very, very odd starting point for life. So it's our expectations that defines what will anger us. That's not to say we won't ever feel sad, but there's a difference between sadness and anger. And I think Seneca's point was we'll be a lot wiser if we manage to expect a lot more, that our sense of what is normal to expect is hugely reduced. So we get very surprised when people suddenly die, or when things suddenly go wrong. He urges us to think, Seneca, that our fate is really in the hands of the goddess of fortune. Now, the goddess of fortune was held to be a woman who commanded all of our destinies. And the thing about her is that she's entirely fickle. She's cruel, vain, and may at any point decide that we will die and somebody else will succeed. Essentially, she's an uncontrollable entity in our lives. And in ancient Rome, the goddess of fortune was everywhere. There was her statue everywhere. She was on the back of coins, etc. And her message was, most of our life is in the hands of somebody else. And however much we try and achieve rational control, she will probably at some point get us. In order to try and cope with the vagaries of fortune, Seneca counselled us to undertake what he called, in Latin, a praemeditatio, a curious exercise called a premeditation. He advised that every morning, in bed, before getting up, you should essentially run through, in your mind, the whole day ahead of you and imagine every single disaster that could occur to you. Not because it would necessarily occur, but in order to protect you if it might. And I just want us to go through what Seneca says in his premeditation. He says, the wise will start each day with the thought that fortune gives us nothing which we can really own. Nothing, whether public or private, is stable. The destinies of men, no less than those of cities, are in a whirl. How often have cities in Asia been laid low by a single shock of an earthquake? How many towns in Syria? We live in the middle of things which have all been destined to die. Mortal have you been born, and to mortals have you given birth. So reckon on everything, expect everything. A year later, the town of Pompeii was destroyed. In other words, we live on unstable ground, and we must accept this in our very fundamental starting point. We must not react with injured surprise to bad things. These bad things are written into the contract of life. No one should have a child, wrote Seneca, without the ability to tolerate the thought that that child may be dead by evening. I have 2 children. He gives some lovely quotes which are oddly cheering. He says, "What need is there to weep over parts of life?" He says, "The whole of it calls for tears." There's also a lovely quote from him where he says, "A man must swallow a toad every morning to be sure of not meeting with anything more disgusting in the day ahead."